It's recording. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's Renee Cormier from the Fractional Referral Network. Today we're talking about we're thriving through uncertainty. We've got Mark Beagan here with us. He's an executive coach and consultant who helps leaders navigate growth, change, and disruption, including mergers, not murders, mergers, reorganizations, and tech shifts. So with his certifications in HR, change management, and coaching, he really brings deep expertise from startups to global integrations and professional services. Um, Mark, could you share some context on how you went from corporate vice president to fractional over the past few years?
Yeah, thanks, Renee. It's always nice to connect with you. It's really interesting because my journey started about 30 years ago, where I moved up from individual contributor all the way up into more of the executive level at a large global engineering company. And through that entire journey, I found myself working on mergers, acquisitions, my joke is two divestitures, and lots of technological disruption. And so what I found was, whether by design or not, my entire career was founded on change and transformation. And so I then adjusted my professional development to suit that so that I'd be very effective in that domain. And I found myself about 4 years ago, after having worked on a large project where we integrated four businesses into one, and it was probably the most satisfying and draining opportunity of my life. I found myself at a stage where I felt that I developed my craft to a certain point, but I also found myself a bit frustrated. And that frustration was founded in the fact that every engagement I worked on was about turning around a business, reorganizing a business, optimizing a business, helping a business adopt new technologies. And as soon as the change was done, it seemed like I was no longer needed, so to speak. And it's interesting. I was speaking to a friend last week, and she said to me, Mark, sometimes the people that take us to the she's not religious, by the way, but she said to me, Mark, sometimes people who take us to the promised land aren't invited into the promised land. And that really resonated with me, because in this chapter of my career, I then said to myself, well, I have this rich experience, but I want to apply it in a new way. And so hence I went off and started my organization about a year ago, where I do typically work with organizations going through change and transformation and so forth.
So, how would you describe the first year in your business, and what lessons did you glean from this experience so far?
Yeah, thank you. Um, it's interesting. If you asked me about a year ago, I would have, I wasn't fully um, aware, I guess, of what it truly means to go out on your own as someone who's been in typically larger corporate settings. And so I really went through three stages, or at least as I came to put this organization together, I wanted to figure out first, where do I have the right to play? And that took longer than I thought, because I wanted to make sure, and this was something that was deeply important to me. If I'm going to come out to the market in my organization, I want to make sure that I've been there and done it, and I can actually add value to organizations. So I landed on consulting, organizational development, and executive coaching, and primarily within the domain of organizations moving through change and transformation, for the very reasons I just spoke about. And I felt very confident about that. And then I talked to yourself, and you, of course, outside of the corporate bubble, so to speak, you shared a really deep piece of wisdom. I know, I'm not sure if you want me to, gush over this,
Go
but
ahead. Gosh, I could,
yeah,
just
it
kidding.
was it was really interesting because you saw me spending a lot of my energy on right to play, and I felt deep about that. And you said to me, Mark, the market will decide. So while you spend all this time on right to play, at the end of the day, the market, which has multiple factors moving all at once, will truly figure out how to pull or take those various offerings that you have. And a year later, you were right. I consider myself to be in a lucky situation because there has been demand within those three domains where I work. However, what I didn't expect was that in the fractional HR consulting space and in the organizational development space, that's about 90% of the demand. And what I've learned about the market so far is the executive coaching space, although it's a growing area, is saturated with many coaches.
Yes.
And so the market did speak. And so um, I still feel that those three offerings, I have the right to play in that domain, but it was a major learning over the last year to recognize that no, the market sometimes requires what it requires.
Yeah.
In terms of specific learning, I think many fractionals uh, will say this as well. Is that I was used to being, and I'll just say this one as a vice president, as an example, I would get what was called white glove service around my technology. Oh, something's not working. Mr. Beagan, we will fix that. And now having to be my tech person, having to be an accountant, how to, all these items, how to network. And I'm
Mhm.
quite a gregarious extrovert, and yet I struggle with networking as an example and tooting my own horn. So um, the shift from being corporate, so to speak, to being an entrepreneur has been large. That said, it's been exciting and I've been very fortunate. There has been a fair bit of uptake in my offerings. So,
Yeah. Well, like I think it's important when you first start a business to be flexible, which is great that you were able to embrace the change that the market told you. It told you where you needed to go. So if you're stuck in doing something in a particular way or sticking with a particular area, and there's no business for you there, you need to find a way to go elsewhere. And I always tell people it's important to have a niche. And but like if the niche that you're in isn't working for you, then you might need to find another niche or sometimes you think that the solution you want to offer or that you can offer is really great and valuable, but it might not be the path of least resistance to getting business. So with the coaching, for example, there's 2 trillion, there are more coaches in this world than anything, and only, even, not even a quarter of them make a half decent living from their coaching. So the odds are against you already. So coaching is kind of a nice to have. It shouldn't be the focus of your work. It can be something that you add along with, or you may find opportunities or ways to leverage it. But unless you have a lot of really strong connections and people who would kiss the ground that you walk on to get a bite of your wisdom, and pay you big bucks for it. I mean, you have to cultivate that. That's not something you just, hey, I'm a coach and ta-da. You
so
have to
true.
cultivate relationships and trust in all elements of business. So no matter what you're selling, nothing happens uh, in the absence of trust.
You know,
So
it's interesting.
yeah,
I
go ahead.
apologize. You just made me think of something as well, and I think that's bang on. I would say that interestingly, one of my largest clients came back after a coaching engagement. So I've almost started to, and this is an experiment I'm doing, is I'm not only networking, but with some of my larger clients or prospective clients, I'm looking at possibly doing some free coaching with key stakeholders in a business. And when they see the value there, that can then lead to a consulting engagement, an OD engagement, organizational development engagement, or even further coaching engagements. Because it is effective, but to your point, it's one of those items where it is saturated, and the economy isn't at 100% either right now. So sometimes that's something that gets
Yes,
frankly
that kind of
passed
thing
by.
is considered fluff. But let me
Yes.
caution you about offering free things because people don't value what is free. And
Mhm.
you can bend over backwards, do skydives and speak in tongues, and they still won't.
This is why I'm connected to you, Renee.
So,
Thank
so you
you.
really don't need you won't you will put a lot of time, effort, and energy into something that the other person hasn't made a commitment to. So you'll ask them to do things they won't do, or you'll only get yourself frustrated, and you will spend a lot of time, and in the end, they won't care. They won't necessarily refer you. You're not necessarily getting anything out of it. I would be more inclined to think in terms of building partnerships with people. And the coaching element can be more of a value add.
I
So
love it.
as you work with a company, for example, you go in on an HR topic. And by the way, this is the other thing I can do for your executive team.
Mm.
So it's not the core product, but it could be a supplementary product, and it's a saleable product, but positioned in the right way, and at the right opportunity. But if you try to lead with that thing that nobody really wants or values, even if you give it away, they won't value it more, they'll value it less. So don't waste your time coaching people for free. You don't need to do that.
I love your counsel. It's interesting you say that. Now, um, first and foremost, I think you're bang on. Secondly, I reached out to a couple of non for profits this year to do some work for them pro bono. And when I set up my company, that was part of kind of my thinking, was that a portion of it would be giving back.
Right.
And there wasn't one bite. And yet I had a couple of tier one clients call me up wanting the same service full rate. And
Yeah,
so, you know what? That's again the market speaking to me, and
that's right.
Renee, my coach, speaking to me. So thank you. It's a great reminder.
Yeah. And honestly, yeah, you offer it for free and they don't value it. If you offered it at a premium, they tell you, they might tell you it's too expensive, or they might tell you, great, thank you. Especially with not-for-profits, they in Canada in particular, governments provide they get a fair amount of funding, and they have to use up their funding. So quite often, doing things with not-for-profit organizations and charities is really about timing. And the month of March, they're spending all their time trying to use up their funding so they can get additional funding the next year. Because if they have been given, for example, $100,000 and they only spent $50,000, then next year they'll get $50,000 less. So then at the end of their fiscal year, they try to burn up as much as possible, and they will throw all kinds of money, stupid money at people, just to use up their funding,
Yeah, it's
you
interesting.
know?
It's very
Yeah.
interesting. And
So timing is everything. If you're going to go to them in October, the answer is no. If you go to them in February, March, the answer is yeah, we got to use up our funding. And can you bill us all at once? You know, we need that,
yeah,
can you bill us 30 grand in one shot because we got to burn up this cash before the end of March?
yeah,
And that kind of stuff. That happens all the time.
so true.
So little tidbit there.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah. So so we talked, about thriving through uncertainty. Can you give us a little wisdom around that? Like what more have you been learning, Mark?
Well, it's interesting because in addition to, learning about where I add value and learning about the market and learning about the shift from corporate to entrepreneurship, what I've seen is also that it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster. And I do a lot of work in that domain with my clients. And so when we connected about a week or two ago, it made me think about thriving and resilience. And one of the areas that I've been deeply and probably intellectually interested in the last year, among many things, has been on within the realm of positive psychology. And historically, psychology was the study of disorders and fixing broken people.
Yes.
And in the last year, I've spent a fair bit of time, especially when you're in the coaching domain and consulting
Yes.
domain, it's more about building and growing and thriving. And I came across this model that I thought could be helpful for the fractional community as they navigate the ups and downs of that journey to become a fractional. It's called the PERMA model, developed by Dr. Martin Seligman. I can happily walk
Yeah,
through
so
it.
I'm waiting for you to tell me more.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So it's a great model and it's very rigorous in its approach, meaning that it's founded on a lot of great research. And so the P in PERMA is cultivating positive emotions. And that is really, when we look into our own well being and thriving as people, having that more positive mindset is so important. And there's a deep connection between where we feel things. And, if we go into evolutionary psychology, we feel things first, right? We've
Yes.
evolved to protect ourselves and feel our environment first, then think, and then mobilize energy and commit actions. And if we can cultivate an optimistic stance, a positive way of cultivating those positive thoughts, there is a direct connection between feeling optimism and joy and all these lovely things. It then creates a frame so that we can think in a more constructive, positive way, which then turns into more positive and constructive um, behaviors, right?
Yes. Yes.
And it's interesting because I've seen some of my clients get stuck in rumination and they ruminate about perhaps many of their negative emotions and so forth. And so when I'm coaching those individuals, we're looking for areas to be appreciative of and breaking that rumination cycle. It's so dangerous because
Yes.
as human beings, if we go over and over and over and over again, all the things perhaps that are not healthy for us, that's a it's a well-known direct path to anxiety and depression, which
Yes.
serves no one.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. Depression is the result of a habit of negative thinking and a habit of negativity. And you
Absolutely.
have complete control over your thinking. People, I think it's only recently that psychologists have come to realize that you're not it's not that we feed the biochemistry in our brain through the thinking. So neurologically speaking, a neural um, you build neural pathways that strengthen certain types of thinking. So when you create a habit of positivity, you are strengthening those neural pathways so that you're less inclined to fall into depression. But if you wake up in the morning and you're climbing out of a hole from the get-go and you don't try to feed yourself through the day with other things. You have to, even strong people, and I'm a pretty strong, positive person, but I work on my head every day. I'm not immune to being overwhelmed or disappointed or, getting a little down on myself in a moment, but I don't ruminate. And I make a point of never ruminating and never allowing myself that opportunity. And, having gone through the most recent example of a great opportunity to ruminate was when I was given a cancer diagnosis. I, I, I spent a certain amount of time feeling sorry for myself. And then I said, okay, stop. You're done with this. You can't do this to yourself. So, maybe it was, I don't know, I might not have been more than a couple of weeks, but it was time to sort of digest what was going on and all the fear and all the what ifs and whatever. But you can't let the what ifs in life hold you back.
Uh,
You have to take that leap, and you have to go forward, and you have to cultivate positivity. So I embraced my bald head. I embraced the treatments and all of the things I had to go through, and I didn't hold anybody responsible for my happiness, because that is my responsibility. And whether it's your business or whatever it is, you're responsible for your outcomes 100%. So that's your P.
I love it. And it's funny. I say this to my clients frequently. I say, you know, reflection is healthy. Rumination is a path to anxiety and depression, so to speak.
Yes,
And
that's right.
there's kind of on this piece here, I thought of a tool that I find helpful with some of my clients. It comes from cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called the STOP technique, and
Yes.
it's with don't please don't correct my grammar. It's with two P's by intention, and it could be with three P's. But
Mhm.
the stop technique is when we check in with ourselves and we see ourselves going down that wrong path, whether it's through rumination or we're overwhelmed or anxious. There's some type of emotionally destabilizing event in one's life. It's a very simple technique. That's what I love about it. Stop, take a breath,
Mhm.
observed where you are, check in with yourself. Why am I feeling the way I do? One thing I give many of my clients is this feelings wheel, which has a number of emotions, primary, secondary, and tertiary emotions, so that when I check in with myself, I can say, okay, I'm feeling this way, and I'm feeling this way because so and so said something that triggered me. And as soon as you do that, it moves from your emotional cortex to your cerebral cortex, and you can start to think.
Yes.
So once you've observed and you've labeled that emotion, then it's all about putting that emotion in perspective and looking at yourself from the helicopter down and saying to yourself, and one thing I say to myself is, will this be a problem 1 hour from now, a day from now, a week from now, a month from now, or a year from now? And when I'm fired up many times, the answer really is no, this too shall pass by tomorrow. And let's
Yeah.
let cooler heads prevail and so forth. And, and so
And
we
I think
start
quite often, even if it is something that's going to be a problem, the next question is, what can I do now? And if the answer
that's
is,
it.
and if the answer is nothing, then you got to leave it, right?
And
Because
you know what?
sometimes shit happens and there's not much you can do, and you sort of have to accept it and move on. Yeah.
Sometimes with my clients, the strategy when we get to proceed, which is the second P, is capitulation, which is a funny long word for, hey, I don't control that. I just control myself. I just have to accept it. And it
Yeah.
doesn't feel right, but it is what it is, and so forth. And so typically when we get to proceed, um, we look at what's worked in the past and then let's put that into practice. And
Yeah.
so, I was writing a very large exam about a year ago, and I found myself on the drive there saying to myself, Mark, you're going to fail this. It's a very tough
Uh-oh.
exam and all that stuff.
Bad self-talk.
And I pulled over took a breath, said to myself, wait a minute. I studied for 3 weeks. I talked to other people who have written the test, and they gave me some tips on how to study most effectively. I know this. And then I got back in the car and said, and what I said to myself was, Mark, you've studied, you know this stuff, focus, right?
Yeah.
And I did, and I passed. So there we go.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people the story you tell yourself is critically important. Like don't don't feed yourself the bad story. You know, who
That's
you
it.
are is who you want to be. You know.
Absolutely. So the
Yeah. So tell
next,
us about the E in
yeah,
in
let's
in
get to the
thermal.
E.
Yeah.
So E is about engagement. And what, and when I describe a lot of these ideas, sometimes I'll talk about polarities, right? So engagement is about being involved in things that are deeply meaningful that gets you into a flow. So there's aspects of your life where you're really good at it, you can flow and move with it and really feel that sense of accomplishment. And the polarity that comes to mind here is I have a number of elements in my life where I'm deeply engaged and I love doing it. And then over on the other end is I'm in a rut. And
Yeah.
so a lot of my clients, when we talk about levels of engagement, whether it's for their personal or professional lives, we try to find activities where they're in the zone and then help them to get out of the rut. And so it's a good way to, again, make
Build
sure that
momentum.
yeah, we're doing
Yeah.
stuff where we can really get in the flow and really
Yeah.
do cool stuff. Sorry.
No, I'm just helping you finish. I just gotta like try to find your words. So I thought I'll help you find a word or two.
Yeah,
So
you're
it's
great.
about building positive momentum. Yeah.
You bet. And it's interesting.
Focusing on what you can do, never mind what you can't do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was in a little bit of a rut earlier this year. And I was also fortunate enough, my kids and I, we went away spring break. And something that's meaningful for me is that when I was younger, I was a reasonably competent scuba diver, but I haven't dove in 14 years. And so I brought my stuff down. And I said to myself, well, I'll go to the pool, and if I don't make too much of a fool of myself, um, I'll go in the pool, and if it goes well, maybe we'll go out and do a couple of dives. And it came back, and we went out and did a number of beautiful scuba dives. And
Nice.
it, I got back, and I felt like I was able to say to myself, "Wow, that's something where I got in the flow. I haven't lost it, and it's still part of who I am. I can still say today I'm a competent scuba
Scuba
diver
diving.
who, there were sharks and turtles and all that stuff. And it's just kind of
Fun.
reimagined. And, it was a wonderful experience. Whatever it is for you, though, whatever you get deeply engaged in,
Your
what do
thing.
you get deeply engaged in, Renee?
Me, you know what? I love to cook, as you know. And so I get enormous pleasure out of feeding people. Um, uh, coming up with just, just I'm a simple kind of person, really. I I I I love to feed people and I love to create things. I never follow recipes unless there's something really specific that I need to follow. But generally speaking, I use my my vast cultural experiences from my past. I bring them into my cooking, and so everything I make is kind of like a inspired by Indian inspired, Middle Eastern inspired, that kind of thing. Although some of my Middle Eastern dishes are definitely bona fide, they're more than inspired. But a lot of the time, just the good food I've eaten in a restaurant and thinking, oh, what's in that? And trying to replicate something I really enjoyed somewhere. And that's a creative outlet for me where it doesn't cause me stress. My mother was a decent cook, but everything was a big production for her in the kitchen. So when I got old enough to cook when she had company, I tell her to get out of the kitchen, and I would do the cooking, and they would just come and eat. Because dealing with my mother and the chaos in the kitchen was more work than just me throwing a meal together for everybody. So like that stuff is easy for me. It's hard for other people, but I get a lot of pleasure out of that, and it doesn't require a lot of emotional energy. And I think, and if anything, it feeds my emotional energy. So, and I think that's the important thing, right? It's to find those little things, and they don't have to be anything tremendous, like what feeds your emotional energy, what gives you life. I'm an extrovert, and I love feeding people, and I get a lot of pleasure out of feeding people. I used to have, many years ago, I had an Airbnb, and I had people come into my home, and I had a couple of bedrooms that I would rent out, and I would cook for my guests, and I would charge them for meals, and they loved it because they could come home. A lot of where I was living at the time, it was a small town, and people who were using the Airbnb were people who were often contract workers. They were just doing some short-term stints at one of the hospitals, or something like that. So they were quite grateful just to not have to do anything and come home and have a meal on the table. And I was at my best doing stuff like that. I actually had consistent 5-star rating. I was a 5-star superhost on Airbnb. I don't know anyone. I've never seen very many people with 5 stars on Airbnb, 4 point something, but five, very hard to find. But it's that hostess with the mostest mentality, the cook, the giver, that kind of thing that has served me in that. And it it gives me a sense of purpose, and everybody needs purpose. And I like that. I don't know, maybe it's because I was the last born child of five, having to be useful.
Yeah, but it's that item, and when you're in the flow, you're not thinking. It's just this thing that comes as natural as breathing,
Yeah,
and those are the things in our life that I think lead to accomplishment.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it was like, it wasn't anything that made me rich, but it gave me tremendous pleasure. Made me rich in more important ways, we'll say.
Well, it's funny because there's some research around R that I think will help you out. And just seeing you light up there, it just tells me that it's who you are, and it's
Yes.
just who you are, and it's so natural as breathing. So that's cool. It's funny because R is all about relationships, and
Ah,
interesting like this. And Renee, you've heard me talk about this research. I talk about this research all the time. I believe it's the Harvard Adult Development Study, where they started in the 1930s. They had a third year class at Harvard. I would argue a pretty privileged group of people. And then they took a group of people from one of the most economically challenged neighborhoods of Boston. And they were looking at who would thrive and live long, healthy, fulfilling lives. And they drew blood, they met every 2 years. There were psychiatrists, there were MRIs, there was everything. And this study continues today. And what they found out was there were people in the Harvard group that went from the top rung of society, went all the way down, and there were people from the bottom of society who went all the way up. And what they found, though, was that yes, making a middle class life is certainly nice. It's nice to have a home and a car and some of those elements that we have. But the number one driver of happiness and fulfillment in life is having a couple of people where you have deep relationships with. And the gentleman that ran that runs the study right now talks about Robert Waldinger talks about how when you have some people, a person or a couple of people in your life that you can truly count on, it helps navigate, as he calls it, the slings and arrows of life. And
Mm.
I can't help but think for those fractionals who are starting this, it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
And so having a couple of people where you have deep, meaningful relationships is so important. And funny enough, in the corporate world, Gallup did research around this. And about 20, 25 years ago, they found out that everyone, even in the corporate arena, needs a friend.
Yes.
Somebody
Yeah.
you can go out to
Yeah.
lunch with and go,
It's
wow,
it's one of the 12 questions of employee engagement. Do you have a friend at work? Do you have a best friend at work? And if you don't have a best friend at work, you're lost, right?
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so positive, cultivating those positive emotions, avoiding rumination and stopping if you can. Uh, Having items in your life that you can engage in, like cooking, or in this case, scuba diving. It was beautiful, right? And then
Yeah.
having cultivating those deep, meaningful relationships, either in your corporate life or in your personal life, is so critical to having um, wellness, well-being, and fulfillment in one's life. So cool.
So that's the R and the M in
M.
perma.
And you
Yeah.
spoke about M. It's M is about meaning, and
Ah,
it's so true because we want to be able to connect to a mission and a set of values. So, in one's personal life or professional life, I always think of the mission as kind of the North Star,
right.
and the values are how we're going to get there. What are the behaviors that we're going to embody to achieve that end? And so, it's really important from a psychological well-being perspective to be congruent with your environment. So in English, what that means is if you've chosen this path and you've chosen a certain set of ways to get there, and you surround yourself with people who are going the other way and going about things very different, that's a fast track to maladjustment and
Yes.
just psychological unwellness. So,
It's the reason fractionals go get jobs because they're not taking advantage of the community. That little plug for the fractional referral network, but that's the M, right? That's getting that connection with people and having people who are on a similar journey and understand the trials and tribulations, because I can guarantee you a good number of fractionals have a partner in their life who or friends around them who do not understand this desire to go and work for themselves, because people who settle for less want you to settle for less. That's just the way it is. So if they've never taken a chance, if they've never wished for more, if they've never reached farther, they don't understand your desire to do something that's outside of what they're doing, the things they never had the courage to do. And it takes a lot of courage. Being self-employed, or being in business is not for the faint of heart. You have to have a certain amount of chutzpah, as they say in Yiddish, balls to stay the course. But you need to be around people who can give you those referrals, can give you that pat on the back, can give you some guidance because they've been there and done that. And that's what I love about the fractional referral network, and it's what I try to create within the community is a group of people who are there for each other, because I know exactly what it's like to be with someone who just wants you to shut up and go get a fucking job. Pardon my French.
oh, I've never heard that word before. Yes, and it's so true. And so, and it was interesting because I'll just share with
Sorry
you.
about the F-bomb.
I love my mom to bits, but my mom is not, just for context, she's 94, and she worked the same company her entire life, right? And 30 years at this company, 2 promotions. So she, she slightly ascended the ranks, so to speak. And so when I said I was going out on my own, I chose, fortunately, she has a little bit of the, forgive me, unfortunately, she has dementia. But because of this case, it's fortunate she has a little dementia. I chose not to tell her that I was going out on my own because
Yeah.
she would say, "Oh, Mark, um, I started, at this level with this company and I stayed 30 years.
Yeah.
And
No one could do that anymore.
I don't need to have that
Even
conversation
even
again."
if you
So,
wanted to, you couldn't.
exactly. Especially given what I do, which is changing and
Mm,
transforming. Again,
yeah.
sometimes the people that take us to the promised land aren't invited into the promised land. I
Sure.
now laugh about that, by the way, but
I had a conversation with someone yesterday, or the day before, just earlier this week. Was a little embarrassed because she's entered the fractional world because she lost her job. And I said, everybody has entered the fractional world because they lost their job. Nothing to be ashamed of, you know. You get to a point you've aged out, and I said, and trust me, the person who's replaced you is going to be looking for a job in 2 or 3 years. There, this is the way the world is working now, and so it's good to have your side gig and make it your permanent gig. If because at some point, maybe if you're a little younger. And you've got the fractional thing going on, you could perhaps keep it as a side gig for a while, but at some point it's going to be your permanent full time because you'll be aged out. Like, I'm 61, I couldn't get a job in a corporate environment to save my soul. I'm very certain of that, because I'm competing with 35 and 40-year olds who are far more valued, unfortunately. um, Good for them, bad for people like me, because but I'm okay with it because my mindset is really not to be somebody's employee. But if I were, looking for that, um, it would be a really tough battle, and it has been for many years. Like, it's one of the things that sort of has pulled me back into being self-employed. I've been self-employed off and on, throughout my whole life, but um, I'm very comfortable with this business of being self-employed. In fact, I like it a lot more than being somebody's employee because I like the dynamic, the relationship. When you are independent, you have a lot more. Your opinions matter more, and you're not seen as um, I don't know, a lesser person, or as an employee has a different kind of a relationship than somebody who comes from the outside as a subject matter expert.
well, I can even see it in you when you're engaging with clients and they're drawing from your expertise. That's deeply satisfying, and
Yes,
and so you're getting a lot of meaning from that. And if it pays the bills as well, that's also an added bonus, right?
that's a
Um,
super bonus.
it's a super bonus, exactly. But at the end of the day, and I remember someone speaking to me and saying to me, you know, you need to find people who value your expertise. And I will say this quite candidly that, um, like yourself, I'm a little older, and I was having a hard time finding in an employment relationship that. And
Yeah,
yet now I've got a core set of clients that have filled my schedule. And one said they love working with me last week. And another
yeah,
one said, we have gone from here to there. And that's all I'm looking for too, is to go back into the um, my service offerings where I feel not only do I have a right to play, but I've actually moved the needle and still use that skill set. And
yes.
fortunately, I'm at a stage now where too it's becoming lucrative. So that's lovely.
It's nicer that, when you're self-employed, you don't have to work to someone else's agenda.
That's right.
Whereas once you slip into that corporate environment as an employee, you become you either have to push your own agenda or fall in line with someone else's. And it's just emotionally, it can take a toll on you. Not
Absolutely.
that, but everything has a price. Even self-employment has a price. And as I said earlier, that's also not for the faint of heart. So where's your comfort zone? Really. So what's the A? So we got that last letter, PERMA, PERMA. What's the A about, Mark?
We have positive emotions. We're in the zone. We're cultivating friends at work or relationships. We're congruent with our mission and values. And the last is achievement. And
Oh,
so, in most cases, and I see this through my executive coaching clients, we start here and 6 months later, there's an incremental growth, meaning that over that arc of 6 months, whether it's during a executive coaching engagement or just one learning and growing and so forth, taking the steps to identify an area where they want to grow and learn. Is this realistic? You know, and then take the incremental steps needed to move forward. And then over time, making that incremental progress such that one can celebrate. So in my life, it's interesting. I was for about 27 years. What I didn't realize, I was a consultant, right? You have a broken process or broken this, or you have three companies needing to come into one. I have some tools for that.
right.
And I also had that kind of teaching cap, which was the organizational development cap, which I used for leaders. And then I went out and took this coaching program, which, quite frankly, before I took it, I thought was going to be just more teaching. And I learned right away that no, this is about seeking awareness and helping the individual understand themselves better so that they can mobilize energy and take really constructive, good actions either in their life or professional life. And I share that because, and you knew me while I was taking this program, and
Yes. Yeah.
I may have bored you to tears during it, but
No, you didn't.
oh, that's sweet. But I got to tell you, every week I was learning a little more, 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 till I passed that program and found that I actually had a profound shift in my life. And what I thought I had was two main skills in my life, and I now have three. And it just felt so good knowing that, to your point about neuroplasticity earlier, I am rewiring my neural networks and adding skills and so forth. And that expression, can't teach an old dog new tricks, is actually not true. We
Yeah.
can rewire our neural networks and so forth. So it's great. And whether it's learning a new skill or having some other achievement in your life, the sheer satisfaction and confidence that comes from charting a path, doing the work basically, and then ideally reaching that thing is deeply ingrained with wellness and thriving in our lives.
Yes. Yes. So we have to wrap up. Mark, are there any last things you'd like to say?
Well, and
And tell
I'll just
everybody
say,
where we can find you. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I can be found at www.markbeagan.com. That's BEAGAN.com. And if I can just say a final thought, and you had said this earlier, I'm a big believer in this. If you want to cultivate wellness and happiness in your life, the first thing you have to do is believe that you are going to be that. Once you change that, then you can apply PERMA into your life.
Yes. Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly for what it's worth. All right. Thank you very much, Mark. I'm going to stop the recording now.